One thing that's really important to me is going for my daily walk. It's a chance for me to clear my head and process whatever events are currently happening in my life, whether good or bad. This spot is one I gravitate towards since I love how it looks aesthetically, and upon discovering this area, I knew I had to take a moment to just sit on this rock and just observe my surroundings. While I was exploring this area, I decided to record some B-roll footage of the insects I stumbled across, and while doing so, a pretty random question dawned on me. Do bugs ever get lost? The intuitive answer would of course be yes, but I guess I wanted to know a little bit more, so I looked it up, and of course, Google's AI confirmed this, but scrolling down a bit more, various other questions were asked by curious internet users regarding bugs, so here's the one that stuck out to me the most. Do bugs mourn each other? This is probably something you've never given any thought to, because I know damn well I never have, but I can't lie, I find it to be a pretty interesting question. Inherently, insects simply don't have the same complex brain or neurological structures we as humans do, and I think to an extent we intuitively understand this, which is probably why we never ask this question, but there is one animal that does in fact have a more complex brain than that of a mere insect, and I'm talking about dogs. And although they don't understand the concept of death in the same way we do, studies show that, to some degree, dogs do in fact mourn the passing of their loved ones. The way in which a dog mourns or grieves is of course different to how we as humans grieve, and given that we are the most intelligent life forms here on Earth, the difference is vast and way more complex as we understand loss, the context in which it can occur, and when it comes to the loss of a loved one, whether through a breakup, divorce, or death, we also understand the implications it can have on the future, as someone who was once dear is effectively gone for good. Swiss-American psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed a psychological model called the 5 stages of grief, and although it isn't scientifically proven to exist in the exact manner in which it's presented, the stages go as follows. First you go through denial, and then anger, afterwards comes the bargaining phase, and then the depression stage, with the very last one to follow being acceptance. I think to some degree when we grieve, we go through at the very least one of the aforementioned stages. However, given that every person is unique and has their distinctive experiences, it's impossible for all of us to grieve in the exact same way, and this is an idea one of my all-time favorite artists, Kendrick Lamar, through Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, presents in the intro track of the album via the song United in Grief, as he simply says the following on the chorus: I grieve different. Everybody grieves different. The feeling of grief comes about through significant loss, and at times, this emotion comprised of anger and sadness among other emotions can cause us to try to fill whatever void has just been opened up through said loss, and this is also a theme present in Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, this idea of trying to cover up the wounds inside of oneself in various ways. I find it pretty ironic that loss in general can oftentimes leave us feeling lost, and even if we may feel lost, I don't believe that's objectively true. I believe it's just a matter of forging a new path built upon the healing of old wounds caused by loss, something that's entirely achievable here on Earth. All it takes is the decision to want to accept that you'll probably never recoup said loss and move on, something that's not inherently achievable in outer space. What do I mean when I say that forging a new path built upon the healing of old wounds is something that's not inherently achievable in space? Well, to answer that question, I believe we have to talk about humanity's relationship with outer space. There once was a time where we didn't know jack about outer space. But with the passage of time or whatever, like, technology was created so that we can, like, study it. Like, telescopes were freaking, like, created, and, like, planets like Uranus. The first man-made object reached outer space. What the flip was going on out there? The first animals were freaking sent into space. Like, they really, like, sent fruit flies and freaking monkeys and dogs before. And eventually, the very first human being made it out there.
We have a saying here when you're nervous about something that you have butterflies in the stomach or butterflies in the tummy. Can you really honestly say that you did not have any butterflies in the tummy before you started?
голубей, беспокоясь, от желудки прыгают бабочки. Можете ли вы заверить всех, что таких бабочек у вас в желудке не было?
Могу заверить.
Yes, I can assure you there were no butterflies, moths, or anything else in my stomach.
The man being interviewed, Yuri Gagarin, was born in Russia on March 9th, 1934. Growing up, he was always pretty physically active, and he also had an interest in aircrafts, eventually having learned to fly efficiently during his time at a school for military aviation located in Orenburg. At some point, the Soviet Union wanted to launch a mission sending the first human being to outer space, and naturally, given Gagarin's position at the time as a senior lieutenant in the Soviet Air Force, he was an obvious candidate for an exclusive nationwide selection process. Him along with the 19 other pilots that were chosen went through various tests and training sessions of physical and psychological endurance, but with Gagarin specifically throughout said training, he surprisingly remained calm and even cheerful, and over time, Gagarin would prove to be an exceptional candidate, excelling in everything he did, and because of this, he was ultimately the one chosen to take on mankind's first ascent beyond our atmosphere, completely solo. He was the first to enter a zone where basic human necessities aren't readily available. It's the reason he went up there wrapped in technology to keep him safe, and it's how he was able to breathe with the oxygen that was provided to him, how he was able to eat and drink, how he managed to not be in the clutches of a low pressure environment such as the vacuum of outer space, and how he was able to eject from the Vostok 1 and land back on Earth via his parachute. Although he did have everything he needed to keep himself alive in the unforgiving conditions of space, as well as during the descent from there, he wasn't necessarily in continuous 24/7 contact with ground control or anybody from Earth, meaning that during his ascent, while he was actually in orbit, and during his descent, there was indeed latency in communication, with there even being periods in which Gagarin would send messages updating ground control on his status, but they wouldn't be received. And with this in mind, I can't help but put myself in his shoes for a moment and think about how I would feel. Completely alone, with nothing but intuition and trust in the technology I'm surrounded by to keep me sane. But Swanaenae, you still haven't told us what you mean by old wounds not being able to be healed in outer space. Man, shut your stupid ass. Now, we just briefly went over the story of Yuri Gagarin. We talked about how he used to be a senior lieutenant of the Soviet Air Force. We talked about how he was the first human being in outer space. We talked about all of the training he had to go through, etc. So I'd argue that through his story, it really goes to show how non-human friendly outer space actually is. Like, let's go back to that BBC interview where Gagarin said he didn't have any butterflies in his stomach, or in other words, he wasn't nervous at all. In that clip, bro was not just aura farming. If you actually look into his story, you'll understand why he wasn't all that nervous. There's an article I found by the Museum of Flight where it talks about some of the most interesting excerpts from his autobiography called Road to the Stars. And if you remember, I mentioned there was latency in communication, and even times where Gagarin's status update messages were not being received by people here on Earth. Now let me place myself in his shoes for a second. If I'm over here sending messages talk about, hey, I'm doing okay, or hey, I'm not doing okay, I need a little bit of help, I'd be like, freak no, baby. Oh, hell no. But the thing is, Gagarin was literally trained in every regard, including for these moments in which his messages weren't going to be received. And this article brings up one aspect of his psychological training that prepared him for this. Quote, from time to time, according to a certain schedule, you must send a radio message. This communication is one-sided. You send a message and do not know whether it has been received. You get no answer from anybody, and whatever happens, nobody will come to your rescue. You are alone, absolutely alone, and only yourself to rely on. I think the mere fact of him having to be 100% prepared mentally, psychologically, physically, as well as needing every single one of his basic human needs accounted for, water, food, and air, and just needing to overall be safe, is enough proof that fundamentally, being in outer space does not allow for us to physically function as normal like we do here on Earth. Much less be able to, sit down, be introspective, and look within and heal from our emotional wounds, whether that be caused by loss or whatever else. Because when dealing with the vacuum of space, that should probably be one of the last things on your mind. Because I imagine you probably need to maintain a relatively clear head while you're up there, since ultimately your main priority is your safety. That should come first, because one screw up could potentially cost you your life. During the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, a competition between the two nations called the space race occurred, and during that period, the two nations seriously stepped on the gas when it came to space exploration, constantly trying to one-up each other and assert a sense of superiority. Naturally, trial and error was the price each nation had to pay when trying to make it out there, and with that being said, there were lots of successes that occurred as well as lots of failures. If you remember from earlier in the video, I mentioned that at one point, animals were sent into space, and I now want to talk about two stories. One about a chimpanzee that was sent up there, and another about a dog. Before I talk about them, however, in the grand scheme of things, these two missions taught us a lot, so perhaps they were successes in the sense that they were necessary proof of concept missions demonstrating that humans can feasibly travel space. However, apart from this line of thinking, one of the two stories was a failure if you consider the loss of a life to be such, even if it was just an animal, and I now want to talk about the story of Ham the chimpanzee. On May 5th, 1961, the very first American astronaut, Alan Shepard Jr., successfully completed a 15-minute suborbital mission aboard the Mercury Redstone 3, aka the Freedom 7, but in order for such a mission to be pulled off adequately, scientists had to have run a series of tests, and that's where the story of Ham comes in, who also completed a relatively short 16-minute suborbital mission aboard the Mercury Redstone 2, or the MR2 spacecraft on January 31st, 1961. This 4-year-old chimp's travels through space effectively served as the proof of concept scientists needed, and essentially paved the way for Alan Shepard's ascent into space later on that year. And when it comes to Ham's mission, he became the first to travel speeds no other chimp had ever reached before, and despite the bumps along the road, as well as the fact that after his capsule rapidly hit the Atlantic Ocean at around 60 miles per hour, having to wait several hours after impact to be recovered, he thankfully survived his mission, and although he was fatigued and dehydrated, he ultimately completed the mission with his life intact, something that can't be said for the next story I want to talk about. She was known as Laika. And on November 3rd, 1957, the Sputnik 2 was launched, and within said spacecraft was a dog cabin. Within this cabin were systems that allowed for breathing, food supplies, a corset that included a waste receptacle, instruments that tracked blood pressure, breathing rates, heartbeats, among many other features. Now, the Soviet Union didn't just whip up this spacecraft in under a month for the fun of it. They fully intended on using it, and that they did. The canine chosen to go on the November 3rd mission, known as Laika, was a 3-year-old stray Husky Spitz mix, and one of her caretakers, Vladimir Yazdovsky, took her home shortly before her flight because he, quote, wanted to do something nice for the dog since he knew Laika's mission was a one-way trip. Quote, the noises and pressures of flight terrified Laika. Her heartbeat rocketed to triple the normal rate, and her breath rate quadrupled. Suffice to say, she wasn't doing so great upon liftoff, and although that seemed to be the case initially, the general sentiment among Soviet publications was that she lived for a week in orbit, so perhaps she eventually got acclimated and then passed away painlessly since, quote, they expected Laika to die from oxygen deprivation, a painless death within 15 seconds, after 7 days in space. However, many years later, the truth about her death would be revealed, as not only did she pass away about 5 to 7 hours after launch, to add insult to injury, due to the Sputnik 2 having been hastily made, naturally it had issues, specifically with the thermal control system, which unfortunately caused Laika to overheat and pass away. In 1998, one of the scientists that worked with Laika, going by the name Oleg Gazenko, stated the following in a press conference, quote, the more time passes, the more I'm sorry about it. We did not learn enough from the mission to justify the death of a dog. As someone with dogs in their life, the thought of one of these boneheads ever passing admittedly makes me tear up a bit. The more time I spend with them, the more I realize they're such precious and pure creatures full of unconditional love to give. And I think that's such a beautiful aspect of mankind's relationship with dogs. Although I find her suicide mission to be heartbreaking, as someone who cares deeply about the loved ones around me, I think if it had been a human being in Laika's place, the loss would have hit even harder. And let's say hypothetically scientists intended on recovering the spacecraft. If that were the case, that sadly wouldn't have been possible due to the aforementioned overheating, as well as the Sputnik 2 upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere having burned up on April 14th, 1958. Like I expressed earlier on in the video, the loss of someone or even something can leave us feeling lost, and it's easy to abstractly imagine running away, and in my case through the music I've released, specifically my album New Stars, this idea of running to a magical location deep within space was appealing to me at the time, and so I expressed that sentiment through the project. However, in this video we went over the reality of outer space and how it's definitely not a place to want to run away to, and with the passage of time I realized running away isn't even all that sustainable of a solution to begin with. Again, loss can sometimes leave us feeling lost, but contrarily, life can leave us feeling found, specifically the people around us or even these little guys. The story of how these kittens were found is honestly pretty sad. Their previous owner pulled up on the side of the road one night and just threw them out, abandoned without food, water, or anything for that matter, effectively leaving them lost and helpless. I found this experience of our family taking care of these guys to be pretty damn beautiful, and although I'm not the one primarily taking care of them, I pop in at least once or twice a day to hang out with them for a bit, and the more I spend time with them, the more I realize how pure and precious they are. The black cat is super friendly and is an absolute snuggle bug. The gray one may be the smallest one out of the trio, but he's definitely the bravest. And lastly, the orange one is pretty chill and is in his own world most of the time. Seeing them having avoided a fate that could have potentially ended their lives before they even started gives me life. And just knowing that, to an extent, I can be seen as a friendly presence of safety and security to these kittens honestly makes me feel found. Something that is only achievable here on Earth. If I haven't made it blatantly obvious, I make all the music for my videos. If you would like to check out some of the tracks, if you would like to check out my music in general, like Apple Music and Spotify and like Amazon Music, links in the description. If you want to follow the IG, you can. I be like, you know, I would like to start posting updates and I don't know, whatever. Just follow the IG, bro, and you'll see what I post there. Thank you very much for watching this video. Yeah, whatever, deuces.